Hi there, I'm Rob Schrader. I'm one of the ministers at Beargrass Christian Church in Louisville, and I was supposed to be a counselor at Cairo 2 and CYF 2 today as we're talking to some Cairo students, and I'm glad to be here. You can see that I'm at Wakandaho, but I'm really sad that we're not here together. Now, you're watching this sometime in July. Today's mid-June for us, June 13th, and we're recording this doing the best we can, but I gotta tell you, it is not the same without you here. We pray that you are well and safe and healthy. We also pray for researchers and scientists that can give us treatments and cures and vaccines or whatever it's gonna take so that we can all get back here to camp soon. We miss you and we love you. We're glad that we get to spend at least this kind of time together. Today we're talking about faithfulness or faith, and the story that we're going to look at together comes from Matthew chapter 14, and I'm going to start at verse 22. So if you have a Bible, Matthew 14, 22 through 32. So here's how the story reads. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out onto the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and he caught him, saying to him, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." You know, of all of the characters in Scripture, one of my favorites is admittedly the Apostle Peter. He's great. He's kind of all action and a little bit of thought. We've got so many stories of him speaking before he thinks, acting before he really considers all of the consequences, like jumping out ahead of himself and then realizing, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. I don't know. I feel like maybe he's a sort of kindred spirit of a sort. He's all passion and energy, and I like that about him. We've got all kinds of stories where Peter kind of messes things up, and this one is often one of those, you know, where it seems like Peter almost has the faith to walk on the waves, but then starts to sink. But I got to tell you, I really feel like Peter gets a bad rap. In general, anyway, but especially in this story, I think he gets a bad rap. I don't actually think he did anything wrong. In fact, I would argue that of all of the disciples in the story, Peter might just be the most faithful. Go with me on this. We end up believing some things sometimes that are not only not true, they're not particularly helpful to our faith. We could list a bunch of them, but one of the ones that I think is the most crippling is that we end up buying into this belief that if we're faithful, then somehow our life will be easy. Or if we're faithful to God, then things will go well for us. I mean, think about it. When things go badly in your life, when you're facing a difficulty or a struggle, the natural response is to cry out something like, "Oh, why me? What did I do wrong? What did I do to deserve this?" As if struggle or difficulty or pain in our life was a punishment. Now, it's true, actions have consequences, and sometimes we make mistakes and it brings about struggle. But just because we face hard times doesn't mean we did anything wrong. This is what I think's going on here in this story. It kind of hinges around how we hear Jesus. Unfortunately, reading this is a little bit like reading a text message. You don't get the inflection. We can't hear how Jesus spoke to Peter. But some people read this as if Jesus were scolding Peter. You know, the moment where he reaches and lifts him out of the water. The line is simply, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Now, some people hear Jesus as scolding Peter, kind of like, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And then the sermon that goes with that is something like, "Oh, you just need to have more faith than Peter, and he almost did it, but then he failed, and he saw the waves, and he got scared." And that doesn't sound very Jesus-like to me. Everything I read about Jesus tells me that he's kind, compassionate, and encouraging. And he meets people where they are, and he helps them grow their faith. I can't prove it, but I've always imagined Jesus in the story smiling at Peter. Even with those same words, I picture him almost like a brother or a parent, and encouraging Peter along the way. "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Kind of reminds me of teaching my kids to ride a bicycle. I knew they were going to fall. Everybody does. Any time you start, you get going a little bit and then down you go, and that's just part of it. I didn't scold my children when they fell off their bike. I just picked them up, and I loved them. Because I knew that struggle, or I knew that falling was a part of learning. It was a part of growth. I have to believe that Jesus knew this about Peter. When Peter asked, "Can I step out on the waves with you?" Jesus knew he would struggle, but he still invited him to come. Friends, sometimes faithful means stepping out of the boat. Sometimes faithful means heading out into the unknown. Sometimes faithful means heading into difficulty and experiencing struggle. Look at the way the story plays out. The very first line in the story says that Jesus, what kind of wind? I've turned my page. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go on to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. So it was faithful for the disciples to leave without Jesus. Now, the English there is really tame. The Greek there is really powerful. Jesus didn't give them an option. It wasn't a discussion like, well, maybe you guys can leave and I'll just hang out here and clean up. It was a command. Jesus commanded them to get in the boat and go without him. What would that feel like? To push off from shore and know that being faithful and obedient to Jesus was heading out to sea without him, and eventually into a storm. When Jesus walked up to the boat, which that in and of itself is pretty crazy, right? But when Jesus walked up to the boat, out of all of the disciples in the boat, there was one who spoke up and said, "Jesus, I want to come walk with you." That's why I think Peter was the most faithful one. He was the one with the courage to step out of the boat, out of that place of safety, and into the waves where it was dangerous and scary. See, sometimes faithfulness means speaking for those who have no voice, or being strong for someone who is powerless, for standing up for someone who is oppressed or pushed down. Sometimes being faithful is being vulnerable, and it can feel a little bit like a storm. Think about it. What if in your school you are in a crowd of people and those kind of jokes start getting told? Now you know the jokes I'm talking about. They're about particular groups of people, and they're mean and they're nasty. being faithful might be you being the one person who has the guts to speak up and say, that's not okay. What if in your school there's that kid, the one, you know who I'm talking about, the one that's getting bullied all the time, who gets made fun of, who gets pushed aside, maybe pushed into a locker, eats lunch by himself, what have you? What if being faithful means you're the one person with the courage to stand in there and be his friend? Now, picture that. It's a little scary. It can feel a little bit like a storm, if you will. But being faithful to Jesus means stepping out of the boat and into that place of vulnerability. Now, the encouragement that I can give you is that just like Peter, even in the midst of those moments when it feels like everything's coming undone, when you feel like you're the only one and the whole rest of the world around you is making fun of you, is pushing you down, is like a storm, that in those moments it's the very hand of Jesus that you will find that will give you strength. See, that's the amazing thing about the story, is that there's something about struggle, there's something about difficulty that shows us who God is. Think about the disciples. So far in the Gospel of Matthew, they've watched Jesus calm a storm back in the 8th chapter. Their response was, I wonder who this guy is. They watched Jesus a couple chapters later heal people that had various diseases and problems, and their response was, that's interesting. They just, right before they headed out in the boat, they just watched him feed thousands of people from nothing more than some loaves and fishes. And their response was, wonder what's happening. But in this story, when they watched the struggle, when they saw Peter nearly drown and be saved, when they endured this difficulty, their response was, surely you are the Son of God. So my friends, that's our invitation. It's to challenge ourselves to believe and understand that sometimes faithfulness means vulnerability. That sometimes life will be challenging. Sometimes you'll need to go through the struggle in order to really experience all of what a relationship with God looks like and feels like and is. So wherever you are, and whatever you're into this summer, however the next few weeks, months, year of your life unfolds, be encouraged. God is with you in the midst of the struggle. Being faithful does sometimes mean walking into difficulty, but that the hand of Jesus will always be there to give you strength, to lift you up, and to carry you through. We love you, and we can't wait to see you again. You're in our thoughts and prayers always. Amen.